Part 1. I know that voice. The blind date was supposed to end with me humiliated, rejected, and quietly blamed for everything. Instead, the enigma on the other side of the table looked at me like he'd found a ghost. I should start with the moment my stepmother ruined my evening. "Smile less," Celine Hart said, adjusting the collar of the black shirt she'd forced me into. "You don't want him thinking you're eager." I stood in the grand foyer of the Hart townhouse, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. She had spent years treating me like something inconvenient, a spare Omega left over from my father's first marriage, and now she was dressing me for a blind date with Lucien Vale, the most dangerous enigma in the country. Not for my sake. For my stepbrothers. Julian Hart, golden child, socialite, and professional coward, had vanished 2 hours before the dinner because he'd apparently decided that being courted by an enigma billionaire was too intense. So Celine had turned to me. "Just get through the dinner," she said. "Be polite. Apologize for Julian's absence if he notices the substitution, and above all, don't embarrass this family. Ist daher. You're sending me to impersonate your son on a date with a man who can buy this house without checking his account balance." Her mouth tightened. Lucien Vale agreed to meet a Hart heir. "You're a Hart." Barely. I didn't say it. There was no point. The truth was simple. My late father had left me a small trust and a family name Celine wanted control over. As long as I stayed in the house and signed where she pointed, she tolerated me. The moment I objected, she reminded me that my trust was still being administratively reviewed, and that gratitude was a more attractive look on Omegas than self-respect. Usually, I let it go. That night, I couldn't. "This is a setup," I said quietly. She smiled, and that was how I knew I was right. If Lucien is displeased, then Julian can make amends later. If the meeting goes badly, the responsibility falls on you. Honestly, Ezra, this arrangement should suit you. You're so good at absorbing damage for everyone else. I should have walked out. I should have taken the little money I had, my voice recorder, and the old laptop I used for late-night contract narration work and never looked back. Instead, I went. Because that's what people like me do when survival has trained us to confuse endurance with wisdom. The restaurant was on the top floor of the Vale Meridian Hotel, private elevator, gold-lit walls, city glittering below like broken jewelry. I almost turned back 3 times before I reached the hostess desk. "Mr. Hart?" the hostess asked. I swallowed. "Yes." "Mr. Vale is waiting." Of course he was. They led me into a private dining room with dark wood walls and windows that looked out over the river. Only one table had been set. Only one man stood beside it. Lucien Vale. He was taller than I expected, which was irritating, because no one needed that much presence and money at the same time. His suit was black, severe, expensive in the way that made price irrelevant. His hair was dark, his expression unreadable, and his scent. God, enigmas were rare enough that most people only knew them through rumor. More dangerous than alphas, more chemically overwhelming, more difficult to read. Some said they were made, not born. Others said they were what happened when power and instinct evolved in the same brutal direction. Lucien smelled like winter rain, smoke, and something metallic beneath it, like lightning before it struck. I felt my suppressants strain uselessly. His eyes lifted when I entered. Silver grey. Sharp enough to fill at lies. I opened my mouth, intending to deliver the elegant disaster Celine had prepared for me. Some excuse about a last-minute substitution, maybe a manufactured illness, maybe a dignified withdrawal. But before I could say anything, Lucien's gaze locked on my face. Then on my throat. Then back to my mouth. And his entire body went still. Not polite stillness. Not social stillness. Predator stillness. I stopped at the end of the table. "Mr. Vale." That was all I got. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood fully. The air changed. Something in my pulse answered before my mind could catch up. Lucien took one slow step forward. Then another. His voice, when it came, was low, roughened at the edges, and far too intimate for a first meeting. "Say that again." I frowned. "Excuse me." His eyes did not leave my face. "Anything. I don't care what." My heartbeat stumbled. I think," I said carefully, "there's been some misunderstanding." Lucien inhaled sharply, like the sound itself had hit him somewhere vital. Then he whispered, almost to himself, It's you. Cold moved down my spine. I'm sorry. He looked at me as though he had spent years imagining this exact moment and still found himself unprepared for it. I know that voice. Silence. The city glittered outside the glass. Somewhere beyond the private room, cutlery clinked, waiters moved, normal people lived ordinary lives. Inside that room, I forgot how to breathe. Because I knew him too. Not by face. Not by scent. By memory. 3 years earlier, on a freezing November night, I had been working a volunteer crisis line under an alias. Not romance, not friendship, just one anonymous human voice trying to keep other anonymous humans from slipping beneath their worst moments. At 2:14 a.m., I took a call from a man trapped in a crashed car on a mountain road. He was bleeding, half conscious, trying not to sound afraid. I stayed on the line with him for 46 minutes until rescue found him. He never gave his name, but I remembered his silence. The way he listened when I said, "Stay with me. Borrow my voice if you can't hold on to anything else." The way he said thank you like he had never asked anyone for help before in his life. And now that same impossible stillness stood in front of me wrapped in black silk and power. Lucien Valley. The man from the phone. Oh, God. He knew it too. I should have run. Instead, I stood frozen while the enigma billionaire who was supposed to politely reject me reached for the back of a chair to steady himself and said, in a voice that sounded almost broken, "I've been looking for you for 3 years." And that was when I realized the blind date wasn't the trap anymore. I was. Part 2, the date that was never a date. "I think," I said after a dangerous silence, "we should both sit down." Lucien almost smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Men like him probably didn't come with warm settings. But it was real enough to unsettle me. "Fair," he said. We sat across from each other, but whatever this was, it had already stopped being a date the moment he recognized me. I kept my hands folded in my lap so he wouldn't see them shake. Lucien watched me with the kind of concentration usually reserved for bomb disposal. "Your name?" "Ezra Hart." His gaze sharpened. "Not Julian Hart." "No." He absorbed that in silence. "Why are you here?" I laughed once, without humor. Because your intended blind date decided he'd rather disappear than meet you, and my stepmother thought I'd make a useful substitute. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. Useful for what? I assume humiliation. If you reacted badly, they'd blame me. If you reacted well, they'd step in later and try to salvage the alliance with Julian. Lucien leaned back slightly. "So your family sent you into a private meeting with an enigma they assumed might punish the deception. That about covers it." He was silent long enough that I regretted my honesty. Then he said, "Do they often use you this way?" The question should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt precise. I looked away. "Often enough." The server knocked gently and asked whether we wished to begin dinner service. Lucien never took his eyes off me. "No." The door closed again. And now it was just us, the unfinished table setting, and 3 years of impossible recognition humming beneath the air. He spoke first. "You worked the North Line Volunteer Crisis Service." Not a question. I blinked. "How do you know the name?" "Because after the accident, I tried to trace the call." My stomach dropped. That was supposed to be confidential. "It was," he said. "I never found you." For some reason, that answer relieved me more than it should have. The North Line had mattered to me. It was the one place in my life where I felt useful without being used. I joined after my mother's death, when grief had left me with the unbearable knowledge of how close silence sometimes sits to catastrophe. I never told callers that. I just stayed on the line and spoke until dawn or ambulance sirens or exhaustion took over. 3 years ago, one of those callers had been him. "I didn't know who you were," I said. Lucien's expression shifted. "Good." That surprised me. "You'd rather I hadn't known." "I'd rather," he said slowly, "that the one honest thing I ever received in the middle of a disaster wasn't influenced by my name." Something in my chest tightened. He continued, "After the crash, I remembered almost nothing clearly for weeks. Pain, glass, the smell of gasoline." His voice lowered. "And your voice. That stayed." The room felt too small all at once. What crash was it? His gaze held mine. The Vale Mountain Road incident. 3 winters ago. I stared at him. That had been in the news for months. Corporate sabotage rumors, a brake failure, Lucien Vale walking away from Twisted Steel and becoming even more untouchable afterward. You were the caller, I whispered. Yes. I swallowed. I didn't realize. I know. Of course he did. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was worse. It was intimate in the strange, terrifying way honesty becomes intimate between 2 people who have never properly met. Then Lucien said, "Your stepmother made a mistake." I frowned. What kind of mistake? She sent you to a man who had spent 3 years remembering the exact shape of your voice. Before I could answer, the door opened without warning. Celine Hart swept into the private dining room in a silver dress that announced wealth and shamelessness in equal measure. Behind her came Julian, suddenly recovered from whatever social disease had made him vanish earlier. I almost laughed. Lucien did not look away from me. Celine smiled brightly. "Mr. Vale, my apologies for the confusion. Julian had an unfortunate delay, but he's here now." Julian, to his credit, at least looked embarrassed. This was a misunderstanding. No, I thought. This was a trap. And everyone had finally arrived for the snap. Lucien rose slowly. When he turned toward them, the temperature of the room seemed to drop. "Leave." Celine blinked. "I beg your pardon." I said leave. She recovered quickly. Surely there's no need for hostility. Ezra was just holding the table until my son arrived. I felt that one like a slap. Holding the table. As if I were furniture. A placeholder. A disposable body in a decent shirt. Lucien's face changed in a way that made Julian take one involuntary step back. "Mr. Hart," Lucien said, eyes still on Celine, "did you consent to this arrangement?" I answered before fear could stop me. "No." Celine laughed lightly. "He's being dramatic." Lucien looked at her then. I have seen storms gather over glass rivers. I have heard the silence before buildings lose power. I have watched people realize too late that they've insulted someone who does not need to forgive them. It looked like that. "My hotel," Lucien said quietly, "is not a stage for family cruelty." Celine's smile faded. Julian stepped in, finally trying to salvage matters. "Mr. Vale, if there's been offense, I apologize. My mother simply thought." "Yes," Lucien cut in. "That is the problem. She thought." He moved toward the door and opened it himself. Security was already there. Of course it was. "Escort Mrs. Hart and her son out," he said, "and blacklist them from every Vale property." Celine's face went white. "You can't be serious." Lucien's gaze flicked toward me once, then back to her. "I am deadly serious." Security stepped forward. Julian muttered, "Mother, let's go." Celine looked at me with naked fury, as though this outcome was somehow my betrayal. Then she straightened her shoulders and hissed, too low for anyone but me to hear, "You always did ruin things by speaking when no one asked." She left. Julian followed. The door shut. Silence again. Lucien turned back toward me, but he was no longer the cold enigma from society pages. There was too much in his expression now. Old recognition, present anger, something dangerously close to protectiveness. And that, more than anything, terrified me, because I had lived my whole life around people who wanted to use my quiet. I had no idea what to do with a man who recognized my voice and wanted the truth instead. Part 3. A proposal I should have refused. "I can have a car take you home," Lucien said. I should have agreed. Instead, I asked, "Why were you doing this?" He glanced at the untouched dinner table. "The blind date." "Yes." A pause. Then, an inheritance clause. I blinked. He looked almost irritated with himself. My grandfather built most of the Vale Group and still believed marriage was a useful test of stability. When he died, he left controlling trust authority divided until I either married or willingly transferred oversight to my uncle. That sounds healthy. It isn't. I almost smiled before I remembered who I was speaking to. Lucien continued, "My uncle has spent the last 3 years waiting for me to make a mistake. The press calls me ruthless. Investors call me effective. He calls me unfinished." His mouth flattened. Apparently, marriage would reassure the board that I'm human enough to keep. And Julian Hart was supposed to fix that. No, Lucian's eyes locked on mine. But you might. The air vanished from my lungs. He said it calmly. Too calmly. As if he hadn't just thrown a lit match into the middle of my life. I am sorry. Lucian moved back to the table and placed both hands on the chair opposite mine. Your family wanted to use you tonight. Mine has spent years trying to force me into a politically advantageous union. I have no interest in Julian Hart. I do, however, have an interest in you. That is insane. Probably. I just met you. No, he said. You saved my life 3 years ago. Tonight I finally found you. I stared at him. You don't know me. His expression shifted, not softer, exactly, but more honest. Then let me. I laughed because otherwise I might have shaken apart. That's not how this works. Then tell me how it does work. I stood abruptly and crossed to the window. The city sprawled beneath us, bright and indifferent. I pressed 2 fingers to the glass and tried to think. I go home, I said. You forget this happened. Your uncle finds another heiress to parade in front of your board. My stepmother blames me for embarrassing her, which is honestly just a Tuesday. Everyone survives. You call that survival? It's what I've got. He said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, what did they take from you? I turned. It was the wrong question. Or maybe the first right one anyone had asked me in years. My father died and left me a trust Celine has controlled ever since by claiming I'm too unstable to manage it. The words came out colder than I felt. Julian gets invited to galas. I get accounting delays. They use my voice for family charity events, private recordings, social smoothing, anything soft enough to make them look generous. I folded my arms. And when they need someone expendable, they send me. Lucian's expression became unreadable. That frightened me more than anger. What if I offered you a way out? He asked. I let out a breath. You mean money? I mean freedom. The word hit like a bruise. Before I could answer, he crossed to the sideboard and took out a thin leather folder. He set it on the table between us. Inside was a contract. Of course it was. I looked at him in disbelief. You keep emergency marriage paperwork in your hotel. Not normally. You were prepared. Ai ma vale. That was, somehow, the worst possible defense. I skimmed the first page and nearly choked. It was not a marriage contract. Not exactly. It was a 12-month public engagement and civil union agreement with financial independence clauses, media protections, separate housing options, and, most shocking of all, a complete asset release guarantee for the other party. Meaning, if I signed, Celine would lose all leverage over my trust the moment Vale Legal got involved. My pulse stuttered. You had this ready for Julian. Lucian's gaze held mine. I had this ready for whoever I was expected to marry. The terms changed 5 minutes after you walked in. I looked back down. There, handwritten in the margin of Clause 9, was a new line. The undersigned party, Ezra Hart, will retain all personal work, royalties, pre-existing claims, and independent voice contracts with immediate legal protection. I looked up. You added my name already. I was hoping you'd stay long enough to consider it. This man was catastrophic. I don't trust you, I said. His answer came without offense. You shouldn't. Not yet. That honesty knocked the anger sideways. I read more carefully. No forced cohabitation.
No mating clauses. No reproductive coercion.
No surrender of identity. A built-in exit after 12 months unless mutually renewed. It was absurdly fair, which made it more dangerous, not less. What do you get out of this? I asked, besides a cooperative stranger with a useful voice. For the first time all evening, Lucian looked away. When he answered, his tone had gone lower. Toi. I get someone beside me I chose. The room went still. I've had enough of being managed, he said. Enough of people arranging my life like a risk portfolio. And if I'm going to step into a trap, Ezra, I'd rather do it with the man who once kept me alive in the dark. I should have said no. I knew I should have. But then I thought of Celine waiting at home with that tight triumphant smile she wore whenever I came back smaller. I thought of the trust she had frozen. The years already lost. The way Lucien had thrown her out not because I was valuable to him politically, but because I'd said no and he believed it mattered. No one in my life had ever moved that fast to protect my refusal. What happens, I asked quietly, if your uncle comes after me? Lucien's eyes turned sharp as blades. Then he learns why people are afraid of me. And stupidly, disastrously, I believed him. By midnight, I had signed the contract. By 1 a.m, the press had a carefully leaked photo of Lucien Vale leaving the Meridian Hotel with an unknown Omega whose face was turned just enough toward camera to become a mystery. By dawn, my stepmother was breaking everything she could reach inside the Hart townhouse. And by noon, I was moving into a private Vale residence overlooking the river while my phone filled with calls I finally did not answer. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing in the eye of something enormous and not yet naming the storm. Because freedom offered by a man like Lucien Vale was never going to come cheap. The only question was what it would cost first. My safety, my heart, or both. Part 4, the voice he remembered in the dark. Moving into Lucien's world felt like walking into a beautifully designed threat. The apartment on the 42nd floor was all clean lines, smoked glass, and silence expensive enough to have its own tax bracket. No family photos.
No daguerreotypes.
No evidence anyone with feelings was meant to stay there for long. Except that by the second morning, someone had placed a walnut recording desk beside the window in the spare room, complete with studio microphone, sound panels, and a note written in blunt black ink. For your work. I asked an assistant to copy the model you use in your online samples.
LV.
I stared at it for a full minute. No one was supposed to know about my samples. My contract narration work paid in irregular bursts and mostly under pseudonyms. Audiobook demos, indie game lines, non-profit hotline training modules, late-night story recordings, small things. Things Celine mocked as pretty little side noises. Lucien had found them. The realization should have unsettled me more than it did. Instead, I touched the microphone like it might dissolve and felt something hot and unfamiliar settle under my ribs. By the third day, the media had identified me. The headlines were exactly what you'd expect. Who is Ezra Hart? The forgotten Hart air captures Enigma Bachelor. Voice actor or social climber? That last one earned a rare curse from Lucien when he saw it over breakfast. You shouldn't read comments before coffee, I told him. You shouldn't exist inside a media ecosystem this stupid. I almost smiled into my tea. Breakfasts became the strangest part of our arrangement. Lucien left for the office in dark suits and colder moods. I worked from the apartment or the studio he'd set up, taking voice jobs and speaking to lawyers from Vale Legal as they bulldozed through the Hart family's false control over my trust. In the evenings, he came home looking like the day had tried and failed to kill him. And slowly, against all reason, we started talking. Not about the contract, not always. About books. About my mother, who had loved radio dramas and vanilla soap. About his grandmother, the only person in his family who taught him gentleness without apologizing for it. About silence. He hated small talk. I hated emotional ambushes. It was, somehow, compatible. One night, I found him standing barefoot in the dark kitchen long after midnight, a glass of water untouched in his hand. You couldn't sleep, I said softly. He didn't startle.
No.
I leaned against the doorframe. Nightmares. A pause. Then, not exactly. Then what? He looked at me over his shoulder. Sometimes I wake up and I can still hear the mountain road. I didn't move. The old instinct returned immediately, the one that had once kept a stranger awake through blood loss and fear. What do you hear? I asked. His hand tightened around the glass. Wind. Metal. The engine ticking while I couldn't move my leg. He exhaled once. And then your voice. The room went very still. Lucien. I remembered almost nothing from that night except that I didn't want to die alone. He turned fully now, moonlight cutting across the severe lines of his face. And there was someone on the other end of the line who refused to let me disappear quietly. I swallowed hard. On the hotline, I had spoken to hundreds of strangers. But I remembered him. Not because he was famous. I hadn't known that. Because he had gone silent for 12 terrifying seconds in the middle of the call and then come back only when I started telling him nonsense about the first pie I ever burned as a child. "Do you remember what you said to me?" he asked. I did. Perfectly. Still, I whispered, "Maybe." His voice dropped lower. "You said, if nobody is waiting for you, borrow my voice until someone comes." The memory hit me so hard it felt physical. I had said it because his breathing sounded like surrender. Because I knew what it was to want pain to make the decision for you. Because sometimes the only mercy you can offer a stranger is your voice crossing the dark. Lucien set the glass down carefully. I looked for recordings after the crash. Interviews. Charity lines. Internal hotlines. I knew I'd never heard anyone speak like that before. A humorless smile touched his mouth. My security team thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe you had. Possibly. I looked away because the tenderness in that answer felt too bright. Then Lucien crossed the kitchen slowly, giving me every chance to retreat. I didn't. He stopped close enough that I could feel the quiet heat of him. The strange electric pressure enigmas seemed to carry in their skin. Not overwhelming. Not coercive. Just present. "Tell me something true, Ezra." The request was almost a plea. So I gave him the one truth I hadn't let myself say aloud since signing the contract. I was more afraid of being wanted than used. Lucien went utterly still. Then, very carefully, like he was handling something breakable, he touched 2 fingers to the inside of my wrist. My pulse leapt hard enough to shame me. His eyes dropped to the movement. "That," he said quietly, "makes 2 of us." If he had kissed me then, I would have let him. That was the terrifying part. But Lucien Vale, for all his sharp edges, understood restraint with frightening precision. He lowered his hand, stepped back, and said only, "Go to sleep. We both have enemies in the morning." I went. But I lay awake until dawn hearing the old phone line in my head, that storm-rattled voice, and the unbearable realization that the stranger I had once saved was becoming dangerous to me in a completely different way now. Because I no longer feared his power. I feared the possibility that beneath all his control, he might actually be kind. And kindness, after a lifetime of strategic affection, was the easiest thing in the world to love like disaster. Part 5. The trap inside the trap. The second trap was cleverer than the first. That made it far more dangerous. It began with flowers. 3 dozen white lilies arrived at the apartment with no sender listed. I found them in the foyer one Thursday afternoon while Lucien was at a board session and immediately felt uneasy. My mother used to say lilies were what manipulative people sent when they wanted elegance to do the work of cruelty. The card inside contained only 7 words. Some voices should stay anonymous, sweetheart.
No signature.
But I knew Celine's venom when I saw it. I took a picture and sent it to Lucien's head of security. 10 minutes later the flowers were gone, the building was on restricted access, and Lucien was calling me from his car. "Did you touch anything else in the delivery?" "Just the card." "Wash your hands." My stomach dipped. "Why?" A beat too long. Then, "Because I want to be certain." That answer was not reassuring. By evening I had my explanation. The card had been dusted with a mild heat trigger compound, not enough to hospitalize someone, but enough to spike an omega scent and cause public instability if exposure continued. The kind of thing tabloids would turn into a week-long feeding frenzy. Celine hadn't just wanted to frighten me. She wanted me chemically discredited. When Lucien got home, he was still wearing his boardroom face. That was what I had started calling the expression he used when he was one strategic insult away from murder. "She used courier relays," he said, taking off his gloves with too much precision. "We'll trace them." I folded my arms. "You sound furious." "I am. For me." His gaze snapped to mine. "For the fact that someone tried to tamper with your body like a public relations tactic," he said. "Yes, Ezra. For you." The room went quiet. No one had ever answered that question so plainly. Then his phone rang. He checked the screen and swore. "What now?" "My uncle," he said flatly. "Emergency board summons. He wants to challenge the engagement on grounds of coercion and mental impairment." I laughed in disbelief. Mental impairment. He believes anyone who chooses love voluntarily must be unwell. That's bleak. It runs in the family. He left 20 minutes later. I should have stayed in the apartment. Instead, I made my own stupid move. There was a voicemail waiting on my old phone, one I'd left powered down for weeks. It was from Julian. His voice was strained in a way I'd never heard before. Ezra, please call me. Mom's gone too far. There's something you need to know about your trust and the old recordings. Please. I listened to it twice. Then, against better judgment, I agreed to meet him in a public cafe beneath one of the downtown towers. I told security. I did not tell Lucien. That mistake nearly cost me everything. Julian arrived looking like someone had finally introduced him to consequence. No designer smugness, no practice charm, just exhaustion and fear. She's been stealing from your trust for years, he said the moment he sat down. I found the transfer accounts. I stared at him. Why tell me now? His laugh was bitter. Because she started using my name on things too. Turns out monsters don't stay loyal just because you're their favorite child. I should not have felt sympathy. I felt a little anyway. Julian slid a flash drive across the table. There's more. She sold private audio recordings of you. My blood went cold. What? Charity event rehearsals. Demo reads. House recordings. She licensed your voice to a biometric developer through one of her shell companies. I couldn't breathe. Vorasprint tech. Identity mapping. Security access. Synthetic replication. My skin went clammy. Why? Julian looked sick. Because your voice is distinctive. Valuable. She said if you were too soft to monetize properly, she'd do it herself. My mother's necklace still lay warm against my throat. My father's name was still legally mine. And now I learned even my voice, the one thing that had ever truly felt like my own, had been treated as inventory. I pushed back from the table too fast. Then I realized the cafe had gone silent. People were staring. At me. No, past me. I turned. 3 men in dark civilian coats had just entered through the side door. Not police. Not cafe staff. 2 coordinated. Their eyes locked on me at once. Julian went white. Ezra, run. I didn't get the chance. One of the men moved fast, reaching for my arm. And the entire front window of the cafe shattered inward in a spray of glass. People screamed. The man grabbing for me was yanked backwards so hard he hit a table. Lucien Vale stepped through the chaos like something summoned out of fury itself. His coat was open, his tie gone, security flooding in behind him, but I barely saw any of that, because his eyes were on me and there was murder in them. Touch him again, he said to the man on the floor, and they'll identify you by dental records. For one shocking second, no one moved. Then security took over. The attackers were pinned. The cafe manager yelled. Julian stood frozen beside the table like he'd finally realized this had stopped being family drama and become criminal. Lucien came straight to me. He looked at my face, my hands, the glass on my sleeves. Are you hurt? I shook my head. Did they inject anything? No. His jaw tightened anyway. You left the building without telling me. I told security. You told security, he repeated, in the tone of a man very close to violence. Then he saw the flash drive on the table. And that? Julian answered before I could. Evidence against my mother. Lucien turned toward him. Julian swallowed. I'm done helping her. Lucien's expression didn't soften. You were done the moment she weaponized his body. You are simply late to morality. I should not have almost smiled. But I did. And when Lucien looked back at me, his fury cracked just enough to show what sat beneath it. Fear. Real fear. Not for his board. Not for his image. For me. That changed something I had been trying very hard not to name. Because it is one thing to be protected as an asset. It is another to be protected like losing you would destroy someone. Part 6. The man behind the enigma. The flash drive broke open more than Celine's schemes. It broke open Lucien too. Inside were records of trust theft, fraudulent licensing, and a negotiation thread between Celine and a biometric contractor interested in using my Vorasprint to refine emotion response AI for executive surveillance products. Translation: my stepmother had been selling pieces of me to corporations. Buried even deeper were messages from Lucien's uncle, Adrian Vale's charming older brother Dorian, discussing instability narratives and reputation leverage. They'd been working together. Julian sat across from us in Lucien's private study, while Vale Legal downloaded copies and security confirmed the men from the cafe were tied to one of Dorian's shell firms. For once, Julian had nothing clever left. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. Lucien's face was unreadable. That sentence should embarrass you more. Julian flinched. I was too tired to enjoy it. After midnight, when Julian had been escorted out under conditional witness protection and the lawyers finally left, I stood alone by the balcony windows and watched the city burn softly with sleepless light. Lucien came up behind me. Not touching. Just close enough to feel. You were shaking in the cafe, he said quietly. I laughed without humor. I'm shaking now. A long silence passed. Then he said, I should have told you sooner. I turned slightly. Told me what? He looked older in low light. Not weaker, just stripped down to the parts he usually kept hidden behind precision. That the mountain road crash wasn't an accident. I stilled. He went on. My uncle arranged it. I couldn't prove it then. Afterward, he played the loyal relative while consolidating allies on the board. He spent 3 years waiting for a sign that I'm too unstable, too isolated, too chemically unpredictable to hold the company together. Lucien's mouth hardened. Finding you threatened all of it. Because you care about me. His eyes met mine. Yes.
No hesitation. No tactic.
Just truth. The honesty in it nearly undid me. I don't know what to do with that, I admitted. You don't have to do anything. He stepped closer. I'm not asking for repayment, Ezra. That word hit too deep. Repayment. Transaction. The language I had been braced for all my life. I looked down. Sometimes I don't know how to separate kindness from leverage. Lucien went very still. When he spoke, his voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. My mother measured love by usefulness. My uncle measures loyalty by obedience. My grandfather measured worth by endurance. He exhaled. I learned young that anything freely offered would eventually be priced. Slowly, I looked at him again. And there he was. Not just the enigma billionaire from headlines. Not just the man from the dark roadside call. A son shaped by conditional love. A man sharpened by survival until gentleness looked suspicious even to him. Someone who knew exactly why kindness could feel like a threat. It wasn't just my voice you remembered, was it? I asked softly. His answer came rough.
No.
What else? Lucien's gaze dropped briefly to my hands, then returned to my face. You spoke to me like I didn't need to deserve saving first. The room blurred for half a second. No one had ever put it that way. No one had ever needed to. He stepped closer still, careful as always, and lifted one hand, not to touch me, but to offer the choice. I made it for both of us. I closed the distance. Our first kiss felt like a line crossing. Not reckless. Not explosive. Worse. Tender. It was the kind of kiss that told the truth before either person had agreed to hear it. Lucien's hand came to my jaw with impossible restraint, like he was still prepared for me to step away. My fingers caught in the front of his shirt. He made a sound low in his throat that almost broke me. When we parted, my forehead rested against his chest for one unsteady breath. This is still a contract, I whispered. Yes. There are still cameras outside and legal attacks coming, and your uncle probably wants me gone. Yes. And you're still infuriating. That actually made him laugh. I looked up. He touched the edge of my cheek with his thumb. Still here. I should have said no. I should have protected myself. Instead, I heard my own voice answer, honest and terrified. Yes. That night, I slept in Lucien's room for the first time. Not because of heat, or instinct, or contractual obligation. Because after the cafe, after the flowers, after learning my voice had been sold and my body nearly used as a media weapon, I didn't want to be alone with silence. Lucien understood without asking. He lay beside me in the dark, fully awake for a long time, one hand resting over mine atop the sheet like a vow neither of us was ready to speak louder yet. At some point before sleep took me, he murmured into the quiet, I would have found you even without the blind date. I believed him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Part 7. The Public Fall of the Hearts. The board summit was scheduled for the following Friday. Dorian Vale intended to challenge Lucien's trust authority in front of investors, media representatives, and half the senior executive structure. Celine, of course, was invited as a concerned family associate prepared to testify to my instability. I had spent my whole life being used privately. Now they intended to destroy me publicly. Lucien took one look at the witness list and said, "No." I looked up from the tablet. "No what?" "No to you standing there while they turn your life into theatre." I folded my arms. "You mean while they try?" His gaze sharpened. "Ezra." "I'm done hiding," I said quietly. "That's how people like Celine win. They make you so tired of defending yourself that you start volunteering for erasure." He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Then if you stand there, you stand with me." The summit took place in the Vale Group's glass atrium, a cathedral to modern wealth, full of chrome, cameras, and expensive fear. Dorian Vale was exactly what I expected. Older than Lucien, smoother, more charming in the oily way men become when they know other people will clean up after their damage. He greeted us like family, which made me instantly want to set something on fire. Celine stood near the press area in cream silk, face serene enough to make murder feel reasonable. Julian was there too, under security escort, looking like he hadn't slept since choosing honesty and discovering it came with side effects. The hearing began with numbers. Shares, control rights, operational stability. Then Dorian stood and smiled toward the board. "My nephew," he said, "has recently made several decisions motivated by personal obsession rather than institutional judgment." Lucien didn't react. Dorian went on. "His sudden engagement to an Omega with documented emotional irregularities, family financial disputes, and a history of anonymous identity work should concern us all." There it was. I felt the room turn. Cameras shifted. Pens lifted. Predators scented weakness. Celine stepped forward at the prompt. "Ezra has always been fragile," she said gently. "Creative, of course, but easily influenced. We've protected him for years." I nearly laughed at the audacity. Before I could speak, Lucien stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Dorian," he said, "tell the board who paid the courier that delivered a heat trigger compound to my residence." The entire room froze. Dorian's smile faltered by a fraction. Lucien continued, "Or should I ask who hired the 3 men who entered a downtown cafe to seize my fiancée after receiving a call from a disposable shell office funded through your private discretionary account?" A ripple of shock moved through the atrium. Celine's face changed first. Fear, finally, beneath the polish. Lucien turned toward her. "And Mrs. Hart, perhaps you'd like to explain why you licensed your stepson's biometric vorisprint without consent while siphoning trust funds legally belonging to him." The screens behind the board lit up. Vale Legal had queued everything. Account transfers, shell companies, audio rights negotiations, courier records, security footage from the cafe, a lovely high-resolution image of Celine's Lily card. Gasps broke out across the press section. Celine stepped back. "This is absurd. Those files are fabricated." "No," Julian said from the witness row, voice hoarse but clear. "They're not." All eyes turned. Julian stood. He looked at his mother once, really looked at her, and whatever lifetime of denial had protected him finally died. "I gave them the archive," he said. "She did all of it. And Dorian Vale funded the pressure campaign." Celine's composure shattered. "You ungrateful little idiot." Security moved at once. The board erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Dorian barked for legal counsel. Celine tried to leave and was stopped at the aisle. Through it all, Lucien turned toward me. Not the board. Not the cameras. Me. "Ezra," he said, voice carrying cleanly through the noise. "Would you like to answer their claims yourself?" For 1 second, I could only hear my own pulse. Then I remembered the card. The years of theft. The way people like Celine had spent my whole life betting I would stay quiet because softness was easier to exploit than rage. I stepped forward. The microphones picked me up instantly. "My name is Ezra Hart," I said, and my voice did what it had always done best. It held steady when I needed it to. I have spent years being told that kindness makes a person easy to use. That silence is graceful. That survival should be enough. I looked straight at the cameras. It isn't. The room fell into stillness. I am not unstable because I feel deeply. I am not weak because my voice is gentle. And I am not property because my family found ways to monetize what they did not understand. Celine stared at me like I had become unrecognizable. Good. I kept going. Men like Dorian Vale and women like Celine Hart depend on one thing above all else, that the people they harm will be too ashamed to speak clearly in public. I let that breathe. Unfortunately for them, I've made a life out of being heard. Somewhere behind me, I heard Lucien exhale. It sounded almost like pride. Security escorted Celine out as she finally began shouting. Dorian remained very still, which I suspected was the billionaire equivalent of hemorrhaging internally. The board voted within the hour. Dorian was suspended pending criminal investigation. Celine was referred for fraud, coercive control, and unauthorized biometric exploitation. My trust was restored in full, and Lucien retained control with overwhelming margin. When it was done, the atrium slowly emptied of chaos. I stood near the glass wall, shaking now that adrenaline had nowhere left to go. Lucien came to me and stopped close. "You were magnificent," he said. I laughed weakly. I thought I might throw up into live financial media. I would have considered that a strategic flourish. That pulled a real laugh out of me. Then his expression changed. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out the original contract, the one I'd signed the night of the blind date. Without a word, he tore it cleanly in half. Then again. Then once more. I stared. Lucien. He let the pieces fall into the trash. "No more traps," he said quietly. "No more arrangements pretending not to matter." His grey eyes held mine with terrifying honesty. "If you stay now, Ezra, stay because you want me, not because you need saving." And there it was. The only offer I had ever wanted and been too afraid to ask for. Freedom first. Love second. Choice always. I stepped toward him and said, with my whole heart finally present in my voice, "Then I'm staying for the man who recognized me before he tried to own the room." For once in his life, Lucien Vale looked stunned. Then he kissed me in the middle of the emptied atrium, while the city flashed silver beyond the glass and everything false finally burned itself out behind us. Part 8. Epilogue. The Voice at Home. 1 year later, no one remembered the blind date as a scandal. They remembered it as the beginning. Celine Hart took a plea deal, lost almost everything, and moved somewhere discreet enough to stop appearing in magazines. Dorian Vale fought harder, of course. Men like him always do. But boardroom predators become less impressive once handcuffs enter the story. Julian, in the strangest twist of all, went to therapy, sold 3 watches, started working for a non-profit arts foundation, and once sent me a text that simply read, "You were always the brave one. Sorry it took me so long to notice." I didn't answer for 2 days. Then I sent back, "Don't waste it." Lucien said that counted as emotional generosity. I told him not to get sentimental. We were married in a winter ceremony so private the press nearly rioted over the lack of access. Lucien claimed he wanted peace. I suspected he also enjoyed denying the media oxygen on principle. It happened in the glass conservatory attached to his grandmother's old estate, with snow falling outside and candlelight reflected in the windows. No dynasty performance. No board politics. Just a handful of people we trusted, a string quartet that knew how to behave, and Lucien looking at me like the world had finally done one thing right. He did not cry. He came close when I read my vows. My voice shook only once, on the line where I promised that if silence ever came for him again, I would cross it. He kissed me before the officiant had fully finished the sentence that allowed it. I still mock him for that. He has never once apologized. The apartment changed after marriage. Not suddenly. Not through decorators. Through living. Books appeared in stacks. My recording desk migrated from the spare room to the sunniest corner of the main living space because Lucien said he liked hearing me work. He started bringing me tea without asking how I took it. I started leaving notes in his files when he forgot lunch. The biggest change came on Thursday nights. That was when I returned to volunteer work. Not Northline exactly. My old identity there remained confidential, but a new foundation Lucian quietly funded after learning how many crisis lines operated 1 grant away from collapse. We built recording resources, emergency voice modules, training libraries, small things that saved actual lives in the dark. Sometimes, very late, when the city had gone soft around the edges and I came back from a shift emotionally hollowed out in the old familiar way, Lucian would meet me at the door, take my coat, press his forehead briefly to mine, and ask the same question every time. How many did you keep? Not because he wanted numbers. Because he understood what the asking meant. Because one winter night, years before he knew my name, someone had asked him to borrow a stranger's voice until help arrived. And he never forgot what that mercy cost to give. One evening, long after the wedding and the trials and the headlines, we hosted a small dinner on the terrace for a few foundation donors. A young beta journalist asked me, somewhat breathlessly, whether it was true that Lucian Vale fell in love with my voice before he fell in love with me. I looked across the table. Lucian, sleeves rolled, tie abandoned, wineglass in hand, watched me with open amusement. I smiled. No, I said. He fell in love with being answered. The journalist blinked. Lucian's expression changed. Later that night, after everyone left and the dishes were abandoned to people richer than us both, he found me standing by the terrace railing under the city lights. That, he said softly, was unfairly accurate. I laughed. Truth usually is. He came up behind me, wrapped an arm around my waist, and rested his chin lightly on my shoulder. The city stretched below us in gold and weather and endless human noise. Home, somehow. You know, he murmured, the blind date really was a trap. I leaned back into him. Yes. For them, he said. I turned in his arms. He kissed my forehead, then my mouth. And in the quiet after, I realized the cruelest people in our lives had made one fatal mistake. They thought a gentle voice meant an easy target. They thought recognition could be manufactured. They thought love could only be a weakness if it was visible. They were wrong. Because the night I walked into that hotel, I expected to be used, replaced, or discarded. Instead, a man who had once heard me through blood and snow looked at me across a dinner table and knew me by the sound of my voice. Not my family name. Not my usefulness. Not my silence. Me. And once you've been recognized that clearly, nothing false can hold you for long. The end.